Saving Tobe, Part 2. The group formed a human chain again and eased into deeper water. Seraphin found himself looking into the face of Step Paul, who held the rope. They were shouting at him and at each other, but a rushing sound filled his ears and he couldn't make out the words. Step leaned into the river while the others held him. His face tensed. The eyes narrowed as he studied Seraphin's face with the look of someone backed into a corner engaging his last desperate move. Then Step Paul tossed the loop of rope with his one free hand. Seraphin watched its slow flight in the air. It seemed to hang suspended in front of his eyes before plopping gently in the water a few feet in front of him. Several times Step pulled in the noose, then tossed it out again. Finally he stopped and cursed himself, fretting over the rope as if searching for the flaw in it. Then he leaned forward once more, set a steady gaze on Seraphin's face, and let go the rope. It sailed before Seraphin's eyes for a moment, a fleeting shadow, a leaf blowing in the wind, before floating down over his head. Step let out a quick, triumphant shout, then pulled, and Seraphin felt the pressure against the back of his neck. He raised his head in the water and arched his neck to keep the rope from slipping off. And then Step reached out, snagged Seraphin's hand, and pulled him in. Step and Fancy snatched their son from Seraphin as he collapsed on his knees ashore. He felt the air heave around him like a gust blowing in and out of a room. It was his family gathering at his side. And then there came a barely discernible touch, Amalia's hand on his arm, removing the rope from his neck. Seraphin noticed in the same hazy way the commotion a short distance from him. Fancy Hall crying and rocking her son as the others pried the boy out of her hands and laid him on the grass. Step slapped at his son and shook him, saying, "Come on, boy! Come on, boy!" through gritted teeth until finally the boy coughed and vomited. Fancy touched Toby's face, his chest, his arms. "Did you ever think?" she cried. "Oh, Lord, did you ever think?" Amalia slapped Seraphin across the face with such force that he fell sideways. "What the hell do you think you were doing going out there, leaving us?" she screamed at him. "I know your men die in water." "Dio santo," Fiorenza said, pulling her away. Amalia cursed Seraphin, beating at his face while Fiorenza struggled to hold her back. Lazzaro pinned Amalia's arms to her sides until they were still, and she began sobbing. Seraphin righted herself on his knees, taking his children's hands for support. "It's okay," he tried to say, but what came out sounded like he was attempting to clear his throat. He knelt for a minute, catching his breath, waiting for the feeling in his arm to return. "You okay?" Lazzaro asked. His wife and children stared at him mutely, their silence more painful than anything his muscles had felt in the water. Let me breathe," Seraphin told them. And Tobe was a newborn calf a few yards away, trembling and skinny and slick with water. His father helped him to his feet, but the boy's legs gave way and he sprawled on the ground, looking up at them with bewildered eyes. Step put his hand on the boy's head. "Lay still now," he told him. "Let your strength come back." One of the men took off his shirt and laid it over Toby's chest. Seraphin felt his hands stinging now from the water, drying in the cuts he had gotten from baling hay. Pale, bloated lines crisscrossed his palms, the whitened edges of the cuts like the mouths of dead fish. He was there, all over again, 4 years ago, looking into Valerio's white, stone face as he lay dripping in the bottom of the boat. That awful understanding. His brother was dead. It was final. There was no way of changing it. If they had pulled him out of the water 2 minutes sooner, 1 minute, who knows? Seraphin had left in the dark morning as usual, taking Valerio along, as he sometimes did. They had slipped out into deep water with Valerio talking about a girl he had met on the Via Villanova, how he had walked with her all the way down to the sea and had gotten up the courage to kiss her just when she bent over to pick up a piece of driftwood. "I was kissing the air," he laughed. Talking, always talking. They had gone out in his boat with Valerio talking and returned 3 hours later with Valerio dead. There was no way to explain the anguish. Valerio was no more. Seraphim knelt at the river bank, clutching his stomach and sobbing. And yet the boy, Tobe Hall, was saved. Wonder mingled with grief, astonishment as heavy as grief, and painful too, an astonishing, beautiful pain impossible to comprehend. Valerio, after 4 years dead, you've come back to us? The others watched uneasily. Step Hall's jaw tightened as he waited to see what would happen. It's okay, Lazaro told Seraphim. He tried to take the man by his shoulders, raise him to his feet, but Seraphim could not be moved. Everything's all right now, my friend, he told Seraphim in a gentle, coaxing voice. Lazaro and Fiorenza exchanged glances with Amalia. It had been a while since they had seen Seraphim like this. Amalia had been on the verge of telling Fiorenza of her plan to take the children and leave Seraphim, even though such a thing was infamante. But then Seraphim started to talk about America, and his old self came back, so she stayed with him, and never mentioned the secrets that she carried in her heart. Seraphim glanced over at Osvaldo, at his bare feet and the wet clothes. "What the devil were you doing in that river?" he said. His voice was weak, but the words made sense now. Osvaldo stepped closer to his mother, keeping his eyes alert. "It's okay," Lazaro told him. "Grazie a Deo. Nobody got hurt." "Hurt?" Seraphim shook his head as if he did not understand the meaning of the word. "Go get your shoes," Amalia scolded Osvaldo, the fear trembling beneath her words. Osvaldo trudged away, searching the river bank for his shoes. Seraphim's own shoes were on his feet. He thought of this now, how if he had taken them off first, it might have been easier to swim. He could have drowned because of a pair of shoes. Step Hall was standing before him. He grasped Seraphim's hand with a powerful grip and pulled him to his feet. Step squinted into Seraphim's eyes, as if straining to see something. Seraphim smiled uneasily, tried to move his hand away, but Step Hall squeezed the hand tighter in his. Seraphim flinched from the pain. "Niente. It's nothing," he told Step. I did nothing." He looked around helplessly. You saved us both." Lazaro laid a hand on Step's shoulder. Finally, the man let go of Seraphim. They stood awkwardly, like drunken men, unable to speak, not even knowing what it was they wanted to say. Step looked out at the river, and then over at his wife and boy a long time. His feet were lead. For all his dreams, he was useless after all. He turned and called gruffly for the group to move along. He lifted his son and laid him against his shoulder like a baby, and when he started walking, his family and friends followed. The Italians fell in behind him, Osvaldo barefoot and carrying his shoes in the hands, while his father stumbled forward, steering the boy with one hand across his neck. Seraphim squinted ahead at the dark shape resting in his father's arms. The boy who was not Valerio. Behind them, Amalia and the girls trailed, subdued and silent, and Lazaro and his wife and the old lady back to the hayfield below the levee, back to the sweet grass and the grazing cows and the acres of flat, silent, dusty land, away from the beautiful, merciless river. That's the end of Saving Tobe.